So, hello. I'm very humble. Well, I do have a pretty limited brain, so I'm partly going to read my talk, but last presentation of the day, hooray! And I knew you would be tired and I would be tired, so I thought we'd start out with some shout-out, yes-no challenges. And so these are challenging situations. They're kind of like the ones that Carrie Lazar-White described as using for hiring youth workers. So just to put you on the spot a little bit. And so I want you to imagine that you are a leader of a program and you face the following situations. Okay? A group of youth wants you to exclude a member from an upcoming retreat because he is too bossy. Do you do it? Yes? Shout out, yes? Youth, yeah. No. Okay, louder? No. Okay, good. Okay. There are no right answers. We'll get to that later. Okay, I think after Stanley's talk, we can skip this one. You wouldn't get yourself into this situation, right? Okay, on a field trip to a downtown store, Latino program members are followed and harassed by security guards. Do you confront the guards? Yes? No's? No's? Okay, that was a little bit harder maybe. By the way, these are all real situations. Okay, you spend 6 weeks painting murals, and 2 days after they're mounted, they're vandalized. Do you lobby your boss, who has a big slush fund, to get money to teach a course on art restoration for the youth so they can restore their murals, and money to buy plasticine to protect the murals next time? Yes? No's? Well, we'll get to the complexity later, but isn't it fun? You get to choose what you want to do? Okay, 2 more. An immigrant youth's parents wants her to quit because they think your program is just about fun and games. They looked in the window. Do you coach her on how to stand up to her parents? Yes? No. Coach the parents. Okay. Okay, last one. You have a master's degree in filmmaking. You spent 4 weeks making a video. Do you stay up the night before the presentation making tweaks in the video so it really shines? Yes or no? Okay, about 50-50. Oh, good. We have total agreement on what you should do. How about if a lot of the donors are going to be there? Definitely no. Okay, last question. Do you believe in magic? Yes? No? Yes, okay, well, so I'm a scientist, even though I'm a qualitative researcher. I'm kind of allergic to the word magic, and it kind of gives me hives, but let's go with it. I know that some of you probably know more about the art or magic of being an effective staff leader, but I decided to just tell my scientific story, and you can tell me later where I'm off base or what I got right. So first step in my story started 15 years ago. I started studying how youth change and grow in high-quality programs, and we studied in depth 12 art, STEM, and leadership programs, and Nickki was part of that team, and she did more interviews than any of the other 15 staff. These were high school age youth, and we found that they really experienced a lot of dramatic changes, opening up, coming out of shells, and we wrote articles, several articles on each of these, showing really what's here is social emotional skills. Some of these are the ones Charles referred to, and they're all available on the website if you want to see them. But when we were doing this research, at the same time I was meeting a lot of really terrific, devoted, compassionate, smart, and often quite humble people who ran those programs. And we don't always know what to call them, but they seemed to know a lot more than I did, despite my long career. And I also began to see how complex their jobs are. They navigate a lot of challenging situations in their daily work, like the ones we went through. And the job of staff is to keep the program running through all the kind of daily random things that happen, as well as fostering active processes of youth development at the same time. And so how the heck do you do that? The Nobel Prize winner Herbert Simon said that to understand a profession, you need to first understand the challenges and problems that its practitioners address in their work. And so, that suggested to me that the magic partly you have to understand those challenges, and I feel like before discussing best practices or developing trainings, we really need to understand what the challenges are on the ground. So Kate Walker, who is now at the University of Minnesota, and I decided that to understand the magic or art of effective program leaders, we try and study systematically the array of problems they have to solve to do their jobs well, and we decided to start by examining the hardest problems they face, what we call dilemmas of practice. So we had them keep track, and in the sample of 12 programs we were following, we created a database of 250 of these dilemmas. And the first finding, as we looked across all of these kind of dilemma situations that came up in these 12 programs, was they were all much more complex than I let on to you. They were definitely not yes-no situations. Let me just give you a fuller example just to demonstrate how much more complex they can be. So Mike ran a program aimed at developing youth skills for community change, and he couldn't attend a program meeting with a newspaper reporter. So the 35 African American youth went with his assistants, 4 college summer interns. The white reporter had published a story in the Chicago Tribune, and actually, and as a result of that, bus drivers who let homeless people, he wrote the story, sorry. The white reporter wrote a story in the Tribune about how bus drivers who would let homeless people ride for free. And that resulted in an African American driver being fired. And the youth knew about this before the meeting, and when they were meeting with reporters, a number of them got really worked up, and they started shouting insults at him for being racist. Other youth then got upset at the youth who were shouting for their rude behavior. The summer interns were horrified, had no idea how to handle the situation. When they got back to the program, they told Mike that these irate youth needed to be disciplined. So Mike had to decide, what do you do in this kind of train wreck situation? And if we had time, and it was earlier in the day, we'd break up into groups, as I've done, and kind of discuss how would you handle the situation. Like, how do you support youth, yet do your job as the adult in charge? How do you balance encouraging youth to speak up and act against racism with teaching them to act respectfully? And each of the 255 dilemmas presented a complex constellation of these kinds of considerations. And so because we're scientists, we divided them up, and we identified 8 different types of considerations that represent each a kind of world of concerns or troubles. Each had distinct problems, paradoxes, sometimes crazy catch-22s. And our sense is that leaders really, daily life required them to be experts in all these domains. Now, just to remind you, of course, these dilemmas don't include all the positive situations, the wonderful proactive opportunities, the good challenges that make up the work of program leaders, but they were our starting point. What was important to us, we skipped these others, but they're important as well. What's important to us is we noticed that our leaders seem to be really good at responding to even the most challenging dilemmas, or at least we thought it was good. Often they responded not only staunching any damage created by situations, they turned them into learning experiences for youth. Now I should mention that the leaders we're studying were not 22-year-olds. These were youth career professionals, often in their 30s or 40s, who'd been running the program for a long time, what Dale Blythe has called master youth practitioners. And they reported they were constantly learning. They were constantly revising, and they'd been doing it for years. So just to finish up with Mike, he'd created a train wreck. He'd blown it by not going to the meeting, but he really rallied in how he responded. First, he calmed the upset interns. It's kind of like on the airplane where first you put the mask on yourself first. Then he called the reporter to apologize, and the reporter was cool. They get yelled at all the time. Then Mike held a debriefing session with all the youth to gather their views on what happened. That was a chance for the youth who had shouted insults to calmly describe what angered them. It's also a chance for the other youth to say how they were embarrassed by behavior. He also had individual conversations with some youth and even disciplined a few. And then he organized a training session on working with community partners, which he said, in the future, I'm going to do this at the beginning of the program. So he was still learning. So what really impressed me was how creative and effective they seemed to be in handling complex situations. What really impressed me, though, was our stories from the youth. They were often quite invested in these situations and how they turned out. And they had strong emotions about these situations, as I've already mentioned, which I think added to the power. So just as an example, in a theater program, the director's pseudonym was Anne. She was directing a play with 110 youth, and she was kind of the only adult. And she reported almost constant dilemmas, a total of 50 across the entire play. But she was like our super magician. I mean, she was a great problem solver, like an engineer, and handled them so well. And the youth reported learning invaluable lessons from how calmly Anne handled what seemed to them like really impossible situations. One youth said she'd been thinking about becoming a teacher, but she just didn't think she could do it. It was too hard. But then after observing how skillfully and gracefully Anne resolved these complex situations that involved her peers and herself, she decided she could do it, and she became committed to becoming a leader. Other youth described also wanting to become teachers or ministers as a result of watching that. So rather than call this magic, we chose to call it expertise. I know that's a little scary word, but because there's a large field of research on expertise across different professions, there's even an Oxford Handbook of Research on Expertise. And a valuable method these researchers use is to compare how members of a profession who are identified as experts by their supervisors handle problems in that profession as compared to similar non-experts. So that's what Kate and I decided to do next, and we gave them vignettes of dilemmas like Mike's to a sample of 80 program leaders identified as experts and novices by their supervisors. And rather than just asking yes, no, we had them provide written answers. First, how they would respond. Or first of all, what were the considerations they would have in that situation, and how would they respond? And so we got this database of hundreds of responses to these dilemmas. And we had 4 big findings. One is the leaders nominated as experts identified a greater number of considerations. This was a highly significant difference. They saw more complexities covering a wider range of domains. They also saw deeper considerations in the situation that went beyond the immediate concerns, including the root causes and future impacts. And this is what research on expertise finds in other professions. The novices, by comparison, tended to focus on the immediate situation. A second finding was the leaders identified as experts generated more possible responses. They had a larger repertoire of strategies. They anticipated how situations would unfold. And research on expertise finds that experts have more elaborate mental models of how things work in their field and can kind of run mental simulations, which is what these leaders were doing. They were able to think kind of 3 steps ahead. And they also seem to know more leverage points. Our leaders also had more if-then elements to their strategies. Some experts described elaborate decision trees, like this person here. This is a situation about Charles, a youth with a fiery temper. And I'm not going to go through all this, but you can see in italics all the choice points there and the if-thens, and it went on for another page. He could just kind of envision the different branching pathways. In contrast, the novices had less detailed responses that focused on the present moment and focused more on just restoring order. When the going gets tough, many of our novices seem to revert to the Army officer mode. Our third finding was that the leaders nominated as experts formulated strategies that responded to multiple considerations. They saw different people's points of view, and they balanced different considerations. So individual versus group needs, that's kind of like the bossy youth situation. And actually the leader in that situation did kind of find some middle ground that helped the youth express their anger towards that one youth, but allowed this youth to come along. Process versus product, how much do you focus on the process? Stanley says high quality products are really important, but you also want this process to occur. In the tweaking the video situation, that's a case where it's kind of a process product. You know, you want it to be the youth's work. You guys were pretty 50-50 on that, but I'm sure if we had more time, we'd sort of talk about really how you navigate that situation. Going to the example, and Robert Sternberg argues that across fields, expertise is all about balancing, trying to resolve complex ecological situations. Our fourth finding was that leaders' responses were youth-centered. These leaders seemed to be fanatically devoted to youth. The experts found creative ways to convert problematic situation into learning opportunities for the youth. So you can go through this list. Let me just give you an example. In response to the dilemma involving a young woman's conflict with her immigrant parents, novice strategies often involve talking directly to the parents. Oh, I'll go talk to your parents. Whereas the expert strategies were much more likely to entail listening to the youth, talking with them, and really helping them, empower them vis-a-vis their particular family situation. Second example was the vandalized murals. Now, there actually was a slush fund. The leader actually did do this art restoration course. Art restoration is a very complicated trade. The art people didn't think they could do it, but they did a terrific job restoring their paintings and then putting them up with plasticine. And we conducted a focus group with the youth on the day after they put it up, and they reported having had a really powerful resiliency experience. I mean, they were so confident that they were ready to bounce back from anything the world threw at them. So the goal of expert leaders was not to insulate youth from challenges, but rather to help support their development of skills to deal with challenges, help them learn to navigate complex real-world situations. So the part of the magic I think we were studying, we found that non-expert leaders were able to see a bigger picture, able to analyze complex situations, able to anticipate how situations would play out, develop responses that responded to the different elements of the situation, and integrate them together. And underneath all that, experts had a caring, loving, tenacious focus on youth and their development. Now, just to be clear, and this comes back to a shout out earlier, not all experts have the same idea about how to deal with a situation. And this is true across fields. They have different philosophies, different personal experiences, different strengths, and as found in other fields of practice, there was a variety of ways, but they shared that idea of tenacity, keeping the focus on youth. Let me just take 2 more minutes to talk about where our research is going. We now have data from 13 new programs, and the data is more focused, so we're following up on this and trying to understand leaders. So the first example, Aisha Griffith, who's here, I think, maybe. Is Aisha here? Yeah, Aisha's there, back there. Currently at the University of Virginia. She wrote just a really incredible dissertation showing the processes through which youth come to trust the leaders. She had data from 105 youth and 25 leaders, and putting those data together, there's just a lot of clues in terms of the little daily things that youth and leaders go through that kind of dance to get to a trusting relationship. Great findings. Another project Vanessa Gutierrez is leading from our team is how do leaders deal with challenging situations involving race and ethnicity? So they're identifying, again, kind of the spontaneous situations that come up, challenges, but also opportunities in daily practice. And an interesting finding was that the leaders were like 50-50. Some of them, even really experienced leaders, would kind of step back. They'd feel paralyzed by a situation. That was more true among white leaders. While others would jump right in. Here's an opportunity where we can talk about race and ethnicity and, drew on their assets to do that, engage. Last one, a big issue for me and for the field is the balance. Leaders have authority, they have authoritative knowledge, but the goal is to support youth agency. So how do you get that balance? And we don't see it as, we've studied youth versus adult-led, but we're really interested on a day-to-day basis. And so the question was, when and how do effective leaders use their authority, and why? What are the situations they feel justified in doing it? And we're focusing on their use of providing advice, setting limits, as well as when do you withhold authority and just let them go for it? And what we found is there's really a lot of consistent guidelines across all different leaders in terms of the sort of decision tree in that. So we're writing an article called The Art of Restraint, which really is how do you very delicately use your authority in ways that are helpful. So let me just end by praising the leaders that are here for the extraordinary devotion, caring, and expertise that I know you bring to your jobs.